Amelia, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
I'm so excited for this. It's literally been years in the making. Um, okay, so let's start with you signed up for your first Tough Mudder when you were age 28. Is that right?
Yeah, around then, I think. Yes.
And you said that you signed up because you realized you couldn't do a single pull up, something I still cannot do today. But why do you think you thought, wait, I can't do a single pull up, so I'm naturally going to sign up for a Tough Mudder? How did that thought process go?
I think that it was something that I mean, like you need a goal or a reason to be able to do something. People are always like, I said, I can't do it. Pull up. I have no upper body strength. But as much as I tried to try it on my own, I was like, okay, if I have a goal, then maybe I'll get better at this. Even if I fail miserably at first.
Yes. So what was the very first Tough Mudder like? Like, were you extremely sore? How did you do?
I think I fell off of every single obstacle. I remember there were monkey bars, and you know how you think about as a kid that you're able to do monkey bars like back and forth all the time. And I like got two rungs in and fell off, and it was embarrassing. And I said, "Oh, all right. Like this is really hard, and I'm kind of embarrassed that I can't do this stuff anymore." And so I think that that's kind of lit a fire in me because I don't like being quote unquote bad at things.
Hey, I'm the same way. That's really interesting. So
So,
you were bad, or you thought
mhm,
you were
yeah.
embarrassed by it, and so you said, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna show these people what I can do.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, but it wasn't so much about showing other people. It was more about showing myself. It was more about figuring out that like I can do this on my own. I don't really care if other people know that I can do it, but it's just something that I was like intrinsically great. Like it kind of grated at me that I couldn't let go of it.
How many races did you do before you were satisfied with your performance?
Oh, I honestly, to this day, I still don't think I'm ever satisfied, because there's always something that you can improve. And it's never, I don't, I, it's what I've learned. And I told myself over many, many years of racing that at some point I would be, that would be enough. But then I realized that the goalposts always kind of move. And so
Yes.
you think you've accomplished something and you say, okay, I've won a world championship. But then you're like, oh, but can I win too? Or can I? And so it's never going to be enough. And once I kind of realize that, I'm like, okay, it's never going to be enough.
That's amazing. This is similar but different. Like, for example, when you first start doing something like yoga, you're like, oh, this
Yeah.
is easy. And then as you go on, it gets harder because you realize you've been doing it wrong all along. You're like, oh, this is how you do it.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, okay. So you actually got really, really good and you went on to become a four-time world champion and one of the most decorated obstacle racers in history, which is absolutely insane. And you did all of this while working full-time at Apple as an attorney.
Mhm.
And my question is like, how? What did your morning routine look like? When did you find time to train? Just like how?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I've actually always found that I am most productive when I have multiple balls up in the air. And it's that cliche saying that if you want something done, give it to a busy person.
Mm.
And that's exactly how I operate. And so it was very much knowing that I needed to kind of fit in everything gave me a structure and routine. It was just non-negotiable. And I started waking up I've always been an early riser, but I started waking up at like 4 o'clock in the morning. And I used,
Amelia.
I still to this day wake up at that time, just like my body's like, all right, let's go. And because I realized that was the one time where I wouldn't be bothered by people, by work. And that if I waited till the end of the day, then I want to get the training in. And so it just was a matter of like fitting it in. And it was kind of fun for me to see what I could do with that.
So, okay. So you would wake up at 4 in the morning and then what did you
Mhm.
do?
I mean, I would wake up and then I would like drink coffee, eat a little bit something, get out the door and hit the trails. And then run in the morning and then strength training a few times a week. So, and then I'd be in the office by 7:30 or so. Yeah.
I can't imagine. Okay, so how many miles would you run in the mornings?
I mean, it varied. To be honest, like my training kind of morphed over time, to focus more on running, less on. I was doing a lot of CrossFit back in the day,
Mm.
but I mean, I would think that my training in the morning was between like an hour and a half, 2 hours, all said and done.
Wow.
Mileage, actually, I never really tracked because I run like up and down mountains, which is a very different thing than, I mean, you're going to run a lot slower doing that. And so, it's changed a lot. But it was generally like a few hours in the mornings.
Got it. And so during that time, whether you're training or whether it's an actual race, how do you occupy your mind during these like super long distances?
Yeah, great question. I go back and forth between like associating and dissociating almost
Hmm.
when you're running. And so sometimes it's like I need to do everything that I can to get my mind off of what is happening right now. So I would sing a lot of songs over and over and over again in my head when I was going through a really low point. And then sometimes I would just associate and focus on like, how is my body feeling right now? And like focus on each of the steps as you're running, or like each of the obstacles. And obstacle racing, especially with like the 24-hour races, it's very easy to break up. So I'd always be like, okay, just get to the next obstacle and that kind of
Hmm.
thing, instead of thinking, you have 23 hours left to go. And that seems overwhelming. If you just break it up into little chunks, you can almost fool yourself to keep going.
I love that. We're going to come back to this later
Yeah.
when we talk about like actual techniques, because I actually learned a lot from you when I was attempting to do a marathon. And I was like, let me listen to everything that Amelia has done. Okay, so, but you were also a really good writer. And I found that a lot of like distance runners are actually really good writers. Does running help your writing in any way?
I think so. I actually write most everything that I put out. I actually write when I'm running, to be honest.
How?
I mean, it's not as it's sometimes I mean, I will carry my phone and have the notes app if something strikes me, and I'll write it down. But actually a lot of my writing is just visual in my head, and I
That's
kind of think
fascinating.
about it. And then I'll like, when I get home from after the run, then I'll like jot down everything. And so that's where I come up with everything. It's kind of where it turns over in my brain.
So that's interesting. So you actually visualize the structure of what you're going to write, and then you write it in your notes or you scribble it down somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it changes, but certain lines come to me, or certain themes come to me, or it's like how it all melds together. I mean, that's honestly, that and swimming are the two places where I can kind of just like shut down my mind and think about that.
Do you think that's because you're actually allowing your mind to wander, and therefore these ideas are kind of coming together and you're making certain associations between them? Or is it something else?
I think so, absolutely. Because if you sit me down in front of a computer and I say, "Okay, I need to write right now," it's not going to happen. Like I
That's fascinating.
can't. I've never been good on forced timelines, which is also probably people have always asked, like, why don't you? It's flattering because people like my writing, and they say, "Well, why don't you write for X, Y, and Z or do this?" And then I'm like,
Mhm.
but because when somebody gives me a deadline, I can't produce. It's
Absolutely.
more like it needs to strike me on my own time. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I always say that. I think for me it's the same thing. I can't find motivation staring at a
Yeah.
blank Google Doc or
Yeah.
page. I think you just, when you have an idea, you need to let it marinate. And for some people it's running, for other people it's driving. It just, you need to let your mind wander in order for your brain to make relationships between these like crazy ideas you may have.
Oh, and absolutely. And I think that most of the things that I write about are things that everything I write about are things that I don't have figured out.
Mm,
And so, the writing process is actually me trying to figure out and work through and process different ideas and concepts and
yes.
everything like that. So it's been very therapeutic for me, to be able to do that.
God, I could talk to you about this forever, but we will move on. So in 2019, you ran Big's Backyard Ultra, which is this
Mhm.
insane race. I'm so fascinated by it. But basically, it's an event in which runners have 1 hour to complete a 4.167 mile loop. And then you have to do it over and over and over again until there's only one person left standing.
Mhm.
Um, do you have to be invited to participate in this race?
Initially when he started it out many years ago, it was just like his friends who crazy people who decided to show up. And now it's become this thing where there's actually like these qualifying races to
Mm.
be able to show up, and you have to apply because it is literally in his backyard. And
Right.
so it's a very small field, but yes.
Wow. Okay. So when were you like ecstatic when you realized you were going to run this race?
I was also scared because I felt like I had like little business being there. Everybody else had done these multi-day races, had run for 6 days in a row, had run across the country. And while I had done 24-hour races, I had never, this is a last man standing race. So you run in circles until there's only one person left. And you don't know how far it's going to go. But
Ugh,
I love racing. For me, I love the mental aspect of it. And that's what
yes.
so much of this was mental. So much of this was mental. And that's the type of races I'm drawn to.
Fascinating. Okay, so the reason this race like on the surface looks so easy, like 1 hour,
Yeah.
4 miles, like
Yeah.
whatever. But the fact that there is an element of uncertainty, you don't know when you're gonna have to when the
Mhm.
finish line is. I think that's what makes it probably so difficult. Can you tell me about the mental aspect of the race, like
Yeah.
more so than the physical? How did your brain react to it? What were you feeling?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny because right now, when people talk about the pandemic, I'm like, this is a last man standing race, everybody.
Yes.
You don't know when the finish is going to be. And so you just have to keep going and put your head down and keep going. Because everyone has been trying to compare it to a marathon. I'm like, no, not a marathon. Marathon, you know where the finish line is. Here we don't know. For me, I think that the mental aspect is really, you go in waves. And I never really had a problem with mental aspect. It was always my body that broke down in the 2 years that I did it. That I was like, that prevented me from going on. But I think that it's very much just focusing on getting through that next loop in front of you. And it's
Mm,
like everything that we do in life is that even now, right now, I look and I'll have these nights where I'll lay in bed and say, uh, I look 10 years down from the road and I go, I don't know what I'm going to be doing. And I have no idea, and blah, 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 blah. And it starts to feel overwhelming and you start to spiral and think, what am I doing with my life? And then you say, no, Amelia, wake up tomorrow morning, put one leg in a pants, like your other, you put your pants on the same way, and like
yeah.
do your thing. And it's just breaking it into little chunks. And that's really what life is, and that's how I do racing as well.
Yeah. And so before you just mentioned this, before this race, you had never run 100 miles
Mhm.
in a race before, correct?
Right.
But a lot of the other competitors had. In moments like this, do you ever panic and you're like, oh my God, I don't think I'm prepared for this? Or do you like feeling underestimated and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think I go through a bit of both, but I do my best racing when I feel a little bit intimidated. The first time that
Yes.
I did World's Toughest Mudder, like the 24-hour obstacle race, I had never run more than 13 miles in my life. And I had zero business in thinking I could run for 24 hours. And so it's just that kind of like, can I do this? I don't even know if I can do it. I don't know what my limits are. I don't know what my mental limits are, my physical limits are. So let's find that out.
Yeah. In the process of finding that out, do you ever just deal with straight up fear? Like, oh my God, I am scared.
Oh, all the time. I'm terrified pretty much before every single race. And I'm one of those people that actually admits that. And because most people, like real competitors, don't admit that. And I'm like, I will tell everyone that I'm terrified, because I think it's very normal. And I think that if you don't have that, there's actually something wrong.
Yeah. Okay. So that actually just reminded me something. I listened to this podcast that you did with Shane Parrish on Farnham Street,
Yeah.
and you mentioned that you grew up and like as a kid you were pretty fearful of like a lot of things. How
Mhm.
did you? Okay, you recognize that about yourself. How did you go about overcoming it?
Yeah, I think that the number one thing for me is it's all exposure therapy. And I never
Mm,
really realized this because that term I don't think was used when I was little. And but the idea that to be able to work through your fears, you're going to have to face them over and over again. And the more times you do it, it's going to take away the power of the things
yeah.
that, and you suddenly all of a sudden realize that that's, I have nothing to fear there. Like I have nothing to fear. So that's been the main way that I say, okay, if I'm terrified of this, I should be doing it. I mean, it's within reasons and limits, but
Yeah.
if it is something that for some reason I'm scared, I'm like, I have no reason to be scared of that. And I think that to get over all of that, have just continually done that within my life.
I think that's a really good example of the idea that competence actually breeds confidence and
Hmm.
not the other way around. Who was it? The astronaut Chris Hadfield. He has this thing where he says, okay, when you're little and you see a bike and you're like, man, that thing is like really dangerous. I could fall, I could hit my head. A lot of things can go wrong. Like
Yeah.
that's a dangerous thing. But then as you get better and you learn how to ride the bike, like it's not that the bike got any less dangerous. It's that you got better and more
Right.
competent and more confident in your ability. So I think that that's a little bit of how, okay, I'm scared of this thing. Let me try to
Hmm.
conquer it by doing it and getting better. That's
Hmm.
really cool.
Absolutely.
Okay, so one thing that I love is that you've been dubbed the queen of pain or the queen of suffering, and you've said that that mastering the art of suffering is actually where freedom lies. Why do you think that?
I think that it's interesting because I think that, and I always need to differentiate between suffering, and I sometimes cringe at this because
Yeah,
this is voluntary suffering. And when I say that, it, and versus there are many places in life where suffering is not voluntary. But I think that
right.
when you put yourself through situations that are very hard and you do that on purpose, it helps you to deal with the messiness in life that is not voluntary.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, it's like, because we're all going to go through involuntary suffering at other times in life. But I think that when you have those experiences, is that you suddenly realize, like, I'm strong enough to get through this and this and this. And then that's where you start to find this freedom that, like, no matter what happens out there, like, life is going to go on and you are going to survive this. And it may suck, but like you'll get through it and then you'll come out the other side.
Do you have a specific example in your life where you feel like the voluntary suffering helped prepare you in a moment of involuntary suffering?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it very much in God, I have so many. I was like, I don't even know where to go there. But I mean, the one thing that it's taught me is that, like, everything is fleeting. Pain is fleeting. Feelings are fleeting. How you feel in this moment is going to change.
Wow.
And so when I've been through heartbreak, when I've been through breakups, when I've been through job changes, every time I'm like, okay, I'm really in it right now. Like, I'm really in it. I'm having a really bad time. Life sucks. But I kind of tell myself, I like the chop wood, carry water, and just like focus on what is in front of you, and things will slowly change. May not be immediate and maybe longer than you want it to be. But I remember that from racing, because it is just, you'll go through ups and downs,
Yeah.
and you can't always predict those.
Okay, so yes. And this leads me to you once said that you make friends with pain, which
Mhm.
actually personifies pain as a human. Another endurance runner who also does something similar is Courtney Dahlwalter. She
Mhm.
personifies pain because she thinks about it as an actual place and she calls it the pain cave
Yeah.
because she's in charge of going in, but she's also
Mhm.
in control of when she gets out. Um, do you do that? Like, is there a reason why you say you make friends with pain and think about it as like a human being in a way, or
Yeah.
a living thing versus just like, oh my God, I'm in pain. I cannot go on.
Yeah, I think because I don't want to see pain ever as an adversary. Pain is your friend. Pain gives you cues. Pain tells you, what you need to focus on. And so, like most of the time during races, I will say, okay, like X, Y, and Z, like my foot hurts. And I'll be like, okay, foot, you kind of hurt right now. And no, I literally talk to the different body parts, and then the foot will start hurting and something else will hurt. And then my brain will start. So or my stomach will start imploding. And I think that if I personify pain, I think of it as separate from me. And if I make friends with it, then it is just something there to like guide me on and to teach me. And it's a lesson in so many different ways.
So when you talk to a certain body part, like, oh my God, foot,
Yeah.
you really hurt right now. So how do you get past that?
I mean, it is something that like, this sounds so funny. And I used to not believe in this at all, but it's almost like this weird positive self-talk and be like,
Yes.
you're fine, foot. You're totally fine, and you're strong and you've carried me through all this training and this is nothing and we're going to be fine, But then there are certain points that if you end up breaking a bone, you probably shouldn't be running on that anymore. But, and we've all been there and done that the wrong way. But I think that it is something that it just takes away the power, because with pain, you start to spiral. So yeah.
I think that's another thing that Courtney talks about, how she talks to herself as you would to a child during races, because I think like that distance and that gentle voice of like, you're okay. Like, don't throw a tantrum right now. I think that also does help. That's really interesting. What does being mentally tough mean to you?
I think that my answer to this has changed over the years, constantly. Cause I used to think mentally tough was showing zero signs of vulnerability, showing zero emotions. I wanted so much in my life to just be that person that just like stone cold killer, just had no emotions, thought everything through logically. And it wasn't me. But I tried to really just be that person. And now I think for me, being mentally tough is actually to notice everything, to notice all my emotions, to not judge my emotions, to not judge my thoughts, to kind of be like, okay, that's not you. And then to be able to react to those appropriately, and then to be able to move through hard situations and move through the pain without just shutting it out. Because just shutting it out and not dealing with it is never going to get you anywhere, because it's going to come out somehow. And so that's what I've learned.
And in one way that came out for you was in 2019, you suffered a fourth stress fracture. And it like that surfaced old wounds that you tried to kind of keep under wraps. You wrote a really powerful blog post called "The Recovery I Needed." And it gave me goosebumps, because I know, like, just as a fellow writer reading it, I knew that was hard for you to write, but like, I knew that you needed to write it. That's how it came off. And you wrote, "The hardest things to fix are the things that we don't want to admit to ourselves." So can you tell me about that chapter of your life and how you realized that?
Yeah. So I was diagnosed with anorexia when I was 16 years old, and I was hospitalized. I was very, very sick. I went through a period of my life in high school and college where I was in and out of treatment. And I, at some point, just decided, I'm like, I'm done with this. I don't want to be identified as the sick girl anymore. I don't want this to be part of my life. So I kind of like shut it away and I hid it. And I thought I had kind of entered into recovery. You started to be an athlete, started competing. And I just, in so many different ways was like, okay, I have a new chapter of my life. That chapter is old. It's not there anymore. Unfortunately, eating disorders are very sneaky illnesses. And over the years, things started creeping back in, and old habits came back and old thought patterns. And so I started to realize, like when I was around 33, 34, that things were getting bad for me again. But I was doing so well in racing and I was winning everything. And I was on, winning world championships and I was on top of the podium. I could justify to myself, like, there's nothing wrong. If I actually still had a problem, like, I wouldn't be doing all of this.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I started breaking bones over and over and over again. And I finally had to take a hard look at myself and say, I'm 35 years old and I still have an eating disorder and I need to fix this because it's keeping me from doing what I love to do. It's keeping me from racing. And it's also keeping me from really engaging in life because everything in my life was about protecting the eating disorder. And,
Wow.
I couldn't be in relationship with people. I couldn't show up for friends. And it was all about me. So, I made that hard decision that I was like, I'm going to go back into treatment. And now is the time that I'm actually also going to speak about this because like I have felt so alone for so many years going through this.
Yeah.
I don't want to be alone anymore.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it took several fractures for you to kind of admit it to yourself. Were you like, when you started breaking bones, did you think maybe it could be this, but you kind of pushed it away and were in denial a little bit, or how did that work?
Yeah, it was this overwhelming shame because with the first one, I broke my femur, which is a hard bone to break. And
Yeah.
I was kind of like chalked it up to training errors, but then things started piling up and I had this nagging voice that I was like, I'm doing everything else right, but I
Mm.
know that I'm not nourishing myself properly. Like, and so it was this slow burn and it took me probably 2 or 3 years to get to the point where I finally just said, I need this to change. And that was hard because I had so much shame because I thought that I should be able to handle it on my own. I thought if I was a stronger person,
Mm.
I would be able to handle it on my own. And asking for help just wasn't in my vocabulary.
Wow. So there's this thing that David Goggins talks about, which is the accountability mirror. And it's like
Mhm.
the hardest person to lie to is yourself at the end of the day. So there's a lot of people, I'm sure, right now that are struggling with something, whether they're ashamed by it or they don't want to admit it. Was there a moment where you said, I like need to seek help versus waiting for other people to tell me? Like, how did you come to that moment of accountability?
Mhm. I actually reached it. I was with my extended family over Christmas in like 2018.
Hmm.
And I remember, everyone was having this great time. There were like 20 of us. I hadn't seen my extended family forever. And all I could do was obsess over like all of the food that was in front of me and like whether or not I was able to go out for a run that day. And I couldn't be present with my family.
Yeah.
And no one knew this. They like I hadn't talked to them about, but like it was crushing me because I felt so just dissociated from what was going on.
Yeah.
And I think that was the moment where I realized I was like, I am not living life. Life is really hollow right now for me. And like, I want to experience more of life.
Do you think that the disorder, when you were winning all these races and it appeared that you were at the top of your sport, did you feel internally kind of different about it?
I think I dealt with imposter syndrome for many reasons,
Yeah.
just being like, I'm not that good. I don't know why I'm winning. But I think that I just, because things were going so well, because I was getting all this external validation and I was winning
Right.
races and like I could pretend there was nothing wrong. So I
Mm.
just walled it off. I just didn't even deal with it for so many years.
So the external validation did not help. Even all the external validation in the world couldn't help like how you were feeling inside because it was kind of
Oh,
what you called dissociative. Yeah.
no, absolutely. And I think that was like one of the main things that I've learned from this is that, you can get people to tell you wonderful things all day, every day, but you're not going to like, it's never going to replace the feeling that you need to cultivate on your own. And for me, I had this cognitive dissonance between how I thought the world saw me and how I saw myself and what I was going through. And I really needed to like, to change that, to get them to like, to come together as the same person.
Yes. And why was it important for you to share this publicly? Because I can't
Yeah.
imagine you were like, I'm going to share this right now. Like, I'm sure it took time.
Yeah, yeah. I had for many years as I was kind of struggling in and out, I would always read accounts of people who had recovered from eating disorders,
Mm,
and people would talk about their eating disorder after they were recovered with an ED, and just done. And that was a chapter in my life, but I'm better than this now. No one was
right.
talking about it when they were actually going through it. And I understand why, because like you need to protect your own recovery. You need to, it's a delicate situation. But I decided that I wanted to give voice to what it's actually like to go through this. And
Yeah.
if anything, it's me writing about it actually shores up my own recovery, because like now I actually am accountable to the rest of the world. um,
Yes.
and I find strength through other people who then share with me.
Have you
So,
received a lot of responses from people who have who have read your story and share their
mhm.
own?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the number of people who have said, who like actually said like, you made me take a hard look at myself and like
Yeah.
go back into therapy, go back into treatment, go do all those things, and be like, it's okay to do this, or like it's okay to do this at age 45, like there. And I think that that's like so important for me, because I never got that from people. I thought that this was a young person's thing. I thought
Right.
that as a mid-30s woman, I shouldn't be dealing with this anymore. So
Wow, it breaks my heart how many taboos there are and how many like weird
mhm,
limits we put on things like, oh, this is a young person's
right.
illness, or this is, and it's just like, no, it's it's really not. But I'm glad you did share it publicly. And can you share where you are in your journey today?
Yeah. It's been interesting. So it's been about almost 2 years since I went back into treatment. And I think that it's ups and downs. I found a very good. I'm running healthy. I've been the healthiest in terms of running that I
That's
ever have.
amazing.
So that's fantastic. I'm like, oh, this food things works. So it does. I mean, that was the main reason for me to go back into treatment. But what I've kind of learned is actually now I've moved past the part where food is really not the hard part anymore, but understanding now that that was a coping mechanism for me for 20 years.
Mm,
Like that was when anything was hard in life, I would just shut down and turn to the eating disorder.
hmm.
And now it's this process of learning how to live again without that coping mechanism there. And that, it's been a hard year for that, given everything that's happened in the world. But it is just kind of like the more that you practice living life without it, like the easier it becomes.
How are you balancing nourishment and rest with your passion for racing and suffering
Mhm.
through the pain and getting through it?
Yeah, and it's really hard because I've had a lot of people who say like you can't be an athlete and be in recovery for eating
Huh.
disorder, because like they would think that the athlete part is part of it. And I worked on that a lot in treatment because I wanted to know. I was like, is this feeding my eating disorder, or can I do this in a healthy way? Can I be an
Mhm.
athlete and like be in recovery? And so for me, it's a lot about just like non-negotiables, hard accountability with other people, with a team of therapists and a dietitian and everything like that, to make sure that I can do what I love, but also, like not do it to the point where it's detrimental to myself.
Yeah, and that's really incredible, and it's amazing you're doing so much better, and it's so cool to me, and I'm sure to a lot of other people, that you don't have to give up what you love in order to succeed at something else. Like you can do both in
Mhm.
moderation with pacing and understanding that there are times when you need to rest,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. And it's been adding rest back in has been huge. I have a coach who's like one rest day a week, at least, and that kind of stuff. And then just learning that how to move through that space and dealing with things that are uncomfortable in there. And it's been really fulfilling to, come to that point.
That's really cool. So I worked on a profile dossier on you 2 years ago. You're actually my first one. I've done 50 since, but you were the first one
That's
I worked
amazing.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was so cool. I still remember where I was when I first listened to your Shane Parrish podcast. I was on a plane. I was listening to it and I was like, oh, I just listened to a podcast, fall asleep. That didn't happen. I was like scribbling notes. I was like, what? It was so cool. But I learned a lot of useful techniques for myself when I was training for that marathon. So one of those lessons that you shared earlier was to practice chunking, and which means you break down long endurance events into little chunks. But I think that also applies to life with anything. Like you mentioned with COVID, like you don't know where the end lies. Can you explain how shifting your focus on the little milestones helps you complete the full race?
Yeah. Because I think that the number one thing is that like 100-mile race is 1 mile at a time. And so I think that if I get overwhelmed and think like, okay, I have 96 miles left to go, then I'm never going to make it. So I think that it's really just like focusing on here and now and focusing on like what you can control immediately in front of you. Because when you start to think 24 hours down the line, when you start to think 6 months, 6 years, 60 years down the line, it gets overwhelming. And you might as well just throw your hands up and say, I'm done. I can't do it. It's impossible. So,
okay, no worries. let me ask you something that I read that like kind of contradicts this idea. And I get both, but I can't put them together in my brain. So Mike Posner, he walked across America, and I read this profile where he said that in his mind, he was like, just make it to Kansas, just make it to Kansas. And that became like a mantra for him. He made it to Kansas, and then his like entire body started breaking down. Cause I think he kind of thought like, okay, you made it to Kansas. Like now it's time to relax.
Right.
How do you practice chunking without like being like, okay, I'm here, but you still have more to go?
Right. Yeah. Because then you're like, okay, I'm here. But then you like, it's really just, this sounds really weird, but my brain starts to go down the road and starts to like spiral. I actually literally say not now brain. Like I will say it out loud. And it brings me back to the moment, and it brings me. And so instead of, because that's how we're always going to do that. We're always going to trip to the future. But just even for me, it's verbal cues, it's visual cues. For a long time, I wrote the word be on my wrist. And so it was just a visual indication, just a reminder, just like to be present in this moment. And like to bring you back. Because it does, seem to get overwhelming at times.
Do you have any like mantras or anything mental that you repeat to yourself in the really, really dark moments?
In very, very dark moments, I think it actually is, I start to talk to myself kind of like Courtney in like a very much like inner child type of way.
Yeah.
And it's like, very kind, very loving. And then being like, okay, what do you need right now to do this? And like, are you hungry? Are you tired? Are you thirsty? Like, what is that immediate need that you can take care of right now?
Mm-hmm. And you also talk about one thing that we definitely agree on is that you should try to do one thing every day that you absolutely do not want to do, but it would be good for you to do. Like one thing every day that sucks.
Yes.
So you've said that you actually enjoy running when it's cold, when it's dark, when it's raining. Why do you think that's important in building confidence and mental resilience?
I think that like if you expose yourself to different elements, if you expose yourself to being uncomfortable, after a while, it's going to get comfortable. It's after a while, you're going to say like, I ran, it was like -5 out this weekend. And it was like, first I was like, man, this sucks. But then when I finished, I was like, okay, I've done that, and it's no longer that bad. And so if you expose yourself to every type of situation, then when push comes to shove, if it's in a race situation, like you can handle that. You have the confidence of knowing that you can handle that.
Yeah. And another thing is that you have not gone full time as an athlete. You've actually
Mhm.
kept your job as an attorney because you say that it's important to have more than one identity.
Mhm.
So, how did you come to this realization that maybe we shouldn't wrap our entire identity around one external thing?
So I think for me, understanding that being an athlete is very fickle, and one
Yeah.
injury can do you and it also. I started being an athlete because I wanted a break from being an attorney. I wanted a different outlet. And the moment that that became something where that was how I needed to put food on the table, it would actually change my relationship with the sport.
Huh.
And so I think for many years, I've just been like, I don't want to have my identity wrapped up in one thing, because if that goes away, then you have nothing else left. And so I know if I can never race again, I'm still an attorney, I'm still a dog mom, I'm still a daughter, I'm still a sister. But like, if so, I think if for me, I love having, like a bunch of different baskets to put my life into.
That's really interesting because I feel the same way. And it came from a time where I labeled myself one way and then that went
Mhm.
away. And I was just like, my whole like confidence and self-worth, I had nothing to wrap it around. And then you
Mhm.
realize by wrapping your identity around your own name, that's probably the most powerful thing. Do you think it's important to have something that you do professionally, but something that you do just for yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I think there everybody needs something that like you can hold close to you as something that brings you joy in like all moments. And it's not something that you think you should be doing. It's
Mm.
not something that others tell you to do. It is something that like genuinely like lights your fire. And so, and I don't necessarily think that your profession has to be your passion. I actually like I don't believe in that at all. I mean, I
Wait,
like
I
being an
love
attorney.
that.
I like being an attorney, but being an attorney is not my passion.
Huh.
And I prefer to have my passion as something that is not tied to whether or not I can, pay my mortgage or put food on the table, because I can take more risks than in my passion. And I can really go for it in that way. And then I have the stability of the job and the profession, that enables me to do my passion.
I really like that perspective because I think a lot of people are constantly like, okay, how do I turn my passion into a business, into a full-time
Mhm.
thing? But what you're saying is, no, like you can still have that intellectual stimulation, but you can also have something that you do for yourself that nobody can take away from you,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay. Another thing that I really like is something you called the merry-go-round of self-flagellation. That is so elaborate and specific. You can't get out of your head. And it's visual too.
Yes.
So you call this the vicious cycle of failing, getting upset about the failure, and then berating yourself for being upset about the failure. Um,
Yes.
so can you explain this and like how you get off that merry-go-round?
Yes, the merry-go-round of self-flagellation is my favorite thing because I rode that merry-go-round for several years. So it was getting injured, then being upset with myself that I'm injured, and then just so it's the secondary emotions is what I really learned is that
Huh.
you are angry and then you're angry at yourself for being angry, so you're ashamed of that, and then you get in this vicious kind of shame spiral, and the only way out of it is to like look at yourself with compassion, and instead of like being angry at yourself, saying no, okay, like that happened, and give love to yourself and self-compassion. And I really realized that I one of like the turning points for me was realizing that how easy I am to forgive others. I forgive others and their faults. I love people's messiness. I love all of that. And I forgive people so quickly, and I never can show that towards myself. And
Yeah.
so it's been this active practice. I'm still not great at it, of just learning to forgive myself. And I tell myself over and over again and I don't know where I heard it, but it's like you were doing the best you were doing the best you could with the tools that you had at the time. And so, and I tell myself that, and it's like I was doing the best that I could with the tools that I had at the time. I have better tools now, so I can do better now.
That's awesome. And I also love the messiness because to me,
Yeah.
perfect people are really boring. So I
Yeah.
love, I love the people who have upgraded their tools over time.
Or their projection of perfect, because nobody is perfect. So you know that they're
Right.
hiding something.
Right. Yeah. And it's fascinating, right? Like I always say that I think your insecurities kind of become your greatest strengths or something that you aspire to be. Like I thought it was interesting when you were talking about how you became like you wanted to be like a stone cold murderer type
Mhm.
person who shows no emotion, but it's probably because you kind of over rotated of I never want people to see me as a sick girl again,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I think we all go through that, but then you realize like there's so many layers to people. That's why I try not to judge anybody no matter what they say or do. I'm like, you don't know what they have going on right now.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. Absolutely. You can't ever tell. And so I think that that's for me also why I'm just like huge on transparency as well. So I'm just like, no, I will tell you what I'm going through at this moment. And so
exactly.
it's like understanding compassion and empathy for others. Yeah.
That's really cool. So, and by the way, as part of the merry-go-round of
Yeah.
self-flagellation, this is a quote from you, but I wrote it down. You said you said I've tried to depersonalize it, detach, and talk to myself from a third-person perspective. And your advice is to give yourself a tangible time limit to feel bad and wallow in the feelings, and then consciously detach. Do you still
Mhm.
practice that?
I try, sometimes better than others. If I give myself a date and I like put that date and I say, okay, like give yourself permission to grieve for 2 weeks. And
Mm,
then, and then tell yourself, okay, like I can wallow in it. I can be sad. I can be angry. And then at that point, then move on. I think I've now come more to the understanding is that like certain things, grief and loss maybe have no
yeah.
specific timeline. So it's more like give yourself 2 weeks. I actually mark it in my calendar on
Wow.
something and I say reevaluate. And so if I get to that point, and then if I'm like, no, I still need to process through all this stuff, then like put it again. But it's almost like marking that timeline and then move on. Yeah.
Do you think it works because it's kind of like a marker in your brain subconsciously? Your brain is like, all right, I have a deadline, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's a deadline, but it's also giving yourself permission to it's getting off that merry-go-round of self-flagellation and giving yourself permission to just wallow in it for a little
Yep.
bit. Like there is nothing wrong with like when people tell you, oh, just get over it. Yeah, oh,
Right.
that helps. That totally helps. Thank you. Thank you. If it was only that easy.
Yet
And
people still
just
say it.
I
Somehow people still say it.
with the eating disorder, it was just like, it's just food. Just eat the burger. I'm like, oh, thank you. You just fixed
Yeah.
all my
You
problems,
know,
20 years of problems. And so I think it's almost just like allowing yourself, like almost like physically giving yourself that gift to just feel.
yep.
Because that's the only way you're going to heal from anything, whether it be injury, whether it be loss of a job, like a person, a
Yes.
death. Yeah. Only way.
The one time that I've done this and it worked for me was when it was with indecision. I
Yeah.
was trying to decide whether I should leave my full-time job at Fortune to work on the profile full-time. That was a
Mhm.
really big decision to me. To other people, it may literally not be. But to me, it was like, oh my God, this is such a big deal. So I literally in my calendar, I circled a date and I was like, I'm giving my brain like all this time to be indecisive and to go through the ups and downs. I called it the seesaw of misery, where like you wake up and you're like, I'm gonna do this, and you go to bed
Right.
and they're like, are you crazy?
Oh
Never.
yeah.
So I gave myself like a month for that, and
Yeah.
then like literally subconsciously I forgot about the thing, and then I looked at it and I was like, wow, I had at that point already decided and I had put in my 2 weeks notice. So I'm like, it's interesting how you kind of subconsciously move towards that because you told yourself like, I'm giving you the time, but like let's have, reevaluate on a certain day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the giving yourself permission is huge, because the moment when you say, oh, I should have done this by now, I shouldn't be already thinking about this, I should be over this, I should be blah, 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 like you're going to should yourself to death. So
Yep. Shut yourself to death. That's great. Okay. And so for someone who just wants to get started, whether it's endurance races or just running 1 mile,
yeah.
what, let's say 3 tips do you have for them to kind of get in the right mindset to start forming that habit?
Yeah. I think the number one thing is to, if it's a motivation issue, set yourself up so you cannot fail. So if it's something like, I know people, and I've done this before, sleep in your running clothes so that when you get up the next morning, you're already in your running clothes, like, and you need to go out. And it's almost like, I think it's what is like 28 days to form a habit or something like that. And so I think that if it's a non-negotiable thing, I thought about it like brushing my teeth and doing that over and over and over again. And it will eventually become something that's just part of your life and the habit. And then also for anyone, like if you're getting into endurance sports or running, just also realize that it's going to suck at first and like to go slow, because I think most people start and give up within a few weeks, but it's like, stick it out and understand that it's not going to be this linear path, because you're going to like feel a little bit better and then it's going to feel awful. And then it's like, like anything in life, it's up and down. But if you stick it out, like once you get over that hump, you're going to eventually like see it,
Yeah.
So,
That's awesome. Every time I see somebody exercising, no matter like how slowly they're running, I'm like, I understand how that is. Like in high school, we had to run for soccer a little bit longer distance. And I was just like, oh my God, I can't breathe. And so I think it's just taking that one step out of the door. And like you said, reducing the friction between you and that goal by sleeping in your running clothes, for example, or putting out your shoes. That's great advice. Okay. My final question to you is, what does the word success mean to you?
Success to me it feels like it's more of a feeling. It's like a contentment with knowing that, it's a contentment and a confidence with who you are and what you put out in the world, not necessarily what you do, but I've come to realize that I don't care about monetary success. I don't care about like certain types of success that we always always associate with it. For me, it's more of being in alignment with who I am and with how I treat other people, and living according to that and living according to those values. And if I have all of those in line and I'm following my internal compass, then I view that as successful.
Absolutely. Because again, like you may be at the top of the podium, but it may not feel like success to you inside. Right. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Amelia. That was great.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.